Two friends were sitting on a terrace and admiring a beautiful view of the evening Chicago. Sighing sadly, one of them said, "Let's go out tonight. We'll have a little rest and have a good time." "I don't know, Darcy. I got so tired at work today that I don't want anything anymore," her friend replied. "Maggie, you can't be like that. Work is good, but you also need to think about yourself," Darcy objected. Her friend at first thought about it, trying to find some excuse, and then gave up on everything and agreed. Maggie was looking forward to the approach of the evening with great impatience. For some reason, it seemed to the girl that her fate would be decided today. "What am I worried about? This is just an ordinary nightclub. I need to rest more often. Wrinkles have already appeared in my eyes, are watering from fatigue," Maggie thought, meticulously examining her reflection in the mirror. Maggie's childhood was difficult, but the modest girl did not like to remember about it, and moreover to tell anyone. She grew up in an orphanage and never knew her parents. Maggie studied very well and was predicted to have a great future, but to the surprise of many, the girl decided not to become a businesswoman, but a school teacher. Maggie Simmons wanted to give students the knowledge that she had learned while studying at the university. Being naturally modest, Maggie hid from everyone that she was an orphan, and only a small circle of people knew about her secret. When the friends arrived at the nightclub, the fun was already in full swing. There was a relaxed atmosphere in which the youth of Chicago made new acquaintances, talked or just danced, enjoying the sounds of rhythmic music. Maggie and Darcy got themselves a cocktail and sat down at a table by the window. And very close by, a company of young people celebrated some significant event on a grand scale. Seeing two pretty girls, the guys, heated by alcohol, began to make greasy jokes in their direction and make indecent proposals. "Darcy, can we get out of here? It's too noisy here. I'm tired of this disgusting music. I'm afraid it will drive me crazy," Maggie offered, wincing. Darcy looked at her friend and nodded curtly. She would have liked to stay in the club longer, but she didn't want to offend Maggie at all. Therefore, after paying a waiter, the girls got up from the table and headed to the exit. At the same time, the friends did not even notice how they were followed by a trio of young guys sitting at the next table. "Hey, beauties, can I ask you just one question? Why have you been ignoring us all evening? Are we unworthy of your attention?" Deliberately aggravating the situation, one of the guys asked the girls. "Sorry, but we don't have time. We're in a hurry," Maggie replied, trying not to give the guys reason to be offended. But the trio, heated up by alcohol, could no longer be stopped. They caught up with the girls and blocked their way. Every minute the young people became more aggressive, and Maggie already felt that the tragic denouement was imminent. Darcy had already taken a deep breath in order to scream, when suddenly a tall, broad-shouldered man appeared next to her, who scattered the tipsy guys in a second. Then, taking the girls by the hands, he quickly turned into a doorway and led them to another street. Recovering from everything she had experienced, Darcy called herself a taxi, since she lived on the other side of the city. But Maggie and the stranger decided to get some fresh air and walk. "Can I take you home?" asked the man, in whose voice there was confidence and strength. Maggie, of course, agreed. Moreover, it was not far to go. On the way to the house, the young people started talking and got to know each other better. "You handled them so quickly, just like in the movies. Who are you? A superhero, perhaps?" Maggie remarked with undisguised admiration. "No, everything is much simpler. I'm a police officer, and I patrol the streets of Chicago, but today I'm in civilian clothes." The stranger smiled. As it turned out, the man's name was Spencer, and yet he really worked as a patrolman. Spencer looked about 7 years older than Maggie, but that didn't stop them from chatting about everything, joking and laughing. Unbeknownst to themselves, the young people experienced a strong mutual sympathy towards each other. After that memorable evening, the relationship between Maggie and Spencer began to develop so rapidly that it became like a fiery element full of tender and passion. Going to the restaurant or walking under the moon in a night city added a special zest to the relationship of young people, further inflaming the passion in their hearts. Darcy, who had never seen her friend so happy, allowed herself to timidly remark, "Maggie, don't you think you're rushing things? The age difference is significant." "Stop it, Darcy! You don't know how attentive and gentle Spencer is. And also we're serious," Maggie said reproachfully. And a month after that, worried like little boy, Spencer made her a marriage proposal. Of course, Maggie agreed, and this day was the best day of her life. Spencer was settling things at work, so that after the wedding he could get a vacation and go to one of the resorts in Miami. Meanwhile, Maggie was busy preparing for the upcoming celebration, sending out invitation cards, and of course choosing the bride's dress. One day, coming out of the studio where she was being measured for sewing a dress, the girl saw Spencer walking down the street holding the hand of a little boy of about 6. Maggie came closer and, barely able to contain her nerves, called out to Spencer. The man looked into the eyes of his beloved girl, and a confused expression froze on his face. "Honey, I'll explain everything. Now just listen to me, please," Spencer said sheepishly. But Maggie, with tears in her eyes, slowly walked away. On the same day, she deleted Spencer's number from her contact list and began avoiding him. Trying to explain himself to a bride, Spencer literally began to be on duty at her house with a bouquet of flowers. Finally, he managed to catch Maggie at exit of the school where she worked. "Don't rush to conclusions. Listen to me, please," the man pleaded. "Talk, I'm listening to you. Although for a cheater who hid that he had a child on his side, you don't deserve it," Maggie said with resentment in her voice. "It's not my fault. It's all Rebecca, my ex-wife. We've been divorced for a long time, and a few days ago she called me and said that she was leaving with her new husband for California. The fact is that her son would be superfluous to her. Her boyfriend is a businessman who saves every penny. So he made a condition. How could I leave my own son to the mercy of fate?" Spencer asked. From surprise, Maggie was confused, and for a moment speechless. But then, she still caught with the initial excitement, and noticed. "You should have told me everything right away. Then there will be fewer problems." "Honey, I was afraid you wouldn't understand me," Spencer muttered, lowering his eyes. Leaving the remark of a loved one unanswered, Maggie hugged him tightly and kissed him. Now that love and tenderness have reigned in the relationship, Spencer introduced her to his son Michael. Maggie quickly found and approached the boy, who immediately reached out to her, feeling the warmth and affection emanating from her. A month flew by unnoticed, and a long-awaited wedding day came. In a dazzling white dress, with a spectacular hairstyle and makeup, Maggie was looking forward to Spencer's appearance. They spent that night apart, preparing for such a significant event in their lives. Soon the guests began to worry and grumble about the fact that the ceremony was delayed by the fault of the groom. Maggie didn't know what to think. On top of that, Spencer wasn't answering his phone. Suddenly, a man in the uniform of a police officer entered the wedding hall and with a mournful look approached the bride. Then, avoiding looking into the bride's eyes, he knelt down and began to cry. Feeling the trouble in her heart, Maggie turned pale and almost fainted. As it turned out, last night, Spencer died while on patrol, trying to detain a particularly dangerous criminal. "He saved me and he died by taking a bullet on himself." The policeman nodded with a sob. An anxious whisper ran through the crowd of guests. "Spencer died in custody. What will happen to his son and fiancé now?" Pulling herself together with difficulty, Maggie walked stiffly to the stage. Then, holding the microphone in her hands, she said, "My beloved Spencer, I am sure that you can hear me now. I love you, my hero. Remember, I will never leave your son. Sleep, my beloved, and let your soul be at peace." After these words, the girl's head began to spin, and she fainted. So, by the will of evil fate, Maggie from her own wedding went to the hospital with a nervous breakdown. Doctors strongly recommended that she refrain from stress, but the girl still broke out of the ward to get to Spencer's funeral. All the days following the funeral, the girl remembered poorly. The only bright ray for her now was Spencer's son, to whom she gave all her love and care. Maggie had to go through a lot to heal her emotional wounds and find peace. Many tears were shed before she learned to live with inner pain caused by the loss of her husband. Remembering the oath given to Spencer, Maggie took custody of Michael and became his mother. The most unusual thing was that Maggie's new love was waiting for her not at all where she was waiting for her. One day, Michael broke his arm while riding a bike. Since the fracture turned out to be difficult, the boy was placed in the ward of traumatology department. While visiting her son in a clinic, Mary unwittingly met his attending physician, Patrick Miller. Ironically, Patrick turned out to be a widower who lost his wife in a terrible accident many years ago. There was a lot in common between young people. After Michael's discharge from a hospital, Patrick and Maggie began to see each other even more often. At the same time, remembering her past, Maggie was very afraid to start a new relationship. But thanks to Patrick's attention and care, there was a place for a new love in her heart. Young people played the wedding 6 months after they met. Patrick, who had no children of his own, fell in love with little Michael like his own son. Looking at the joyful faces of Maggie, Patrick, and Michael, there is no doubt that they have found their happiness, which they have dreamed of for so long.